Evie brings mana wahine to Aotearoa. She's had that overseas experience. She's had experience in all our wānanga.
It's really the scale of this operation that Evie is well set for in terms of her own resume, her background, her skills.
Regardless of the challenges the wānanga might face moving forward, I'm sure she'll be able to manage those perhaps choppy waters that may come in 1-2 years' time.
Evie O'Brien, the new Chief Executive of Te Wānanga o Aotearoa. What drives her sense of leadership?
We're obligated to think about 100 years from now, not 3 years from now, not this current government, but to think about what will the world look, taste, smell, feel like for our kids, our mokopuna. What kind of leadership should I try to give example to? And it is that evolution of the revolution.
Years ago, while living in Te Teko, Evie visited Oxford University as part of the Atlantic Fellowship Program. What was your first impression of Oxford?
I loved it. It's the centre of the empire. It's the place where colonisers were trained to do what they did, not least to do what they did in New Zealand. And that said, there was something about the place.
After delivering a speech, Evie was invited to be the inaugural program director at the Atlantic Institute, based at Rhodes House. What did you bring, do you think, with your Māori lens and experience to Oxford?
Can-do attitude, zero filter, so saying things how they are.
Do they not really do that over there?
No, it's very polite.
According to one student at Oxford, that wasn't all Evie brought.
One of these American women who was the head of the scholarship I was studying, she started talking about mana out of nowhere in the middle of her corridor. And I was the only one in the room who clicked and been like, what's going on here? Why is she talking about mana? And I found out it's because Evie had been in her ear and kind of told her all of this stuff about the mana of people and how you should uplift their mana when you meet them and things like that.
Reeve describes how Evie also introduced the concept of whakawhanaungatanga and pōhiri into her programs.
We spend like a couple hours doing that as opposed to just being like, hi, I'm so-and-so and I study this. It's kind of like turned into this whole process, and that's because Evie would make the staff and the operations there do that kind of thing, and it was quite foreign to them. They're like, oh, you're going to put on this huge thing just to say hello? And she's like, yep, I'm going to do that. And then beyond that, kind of everybody's pet name for her was like Auntie Evie, and that was just a testament to how she'd made them feel quite connected and made them feel looked after.
For the past 6 years, Evie's role has seen her engaging with students, presidents, judges, activists, world leaders. So what was your actual job? What did you do?
My role was to consult widely with fellows and staff, more than 80 countries across the world, to identify what it was that the Institute could do in terms of programming, essentially to build a community of change makers. So if you've got an activist in South Africa and a community organiser from the streets of Chicago and a neuroscientist working on displacement in Jordan, what's the common ground? So my role was to develop all of the programming that enabled or provided the conditions for that common ground to be found. The common ground, without fail, was colonisation, the root cause, and often overlaid by racism.
How do you go beyond that echo chamber of activists into the transformational change that really needs to happen?
The first thing was establishing relationships and trust. The fellows themselves, once those conditions were in place, would find something to collaborate on. The institute that I eventually came to lead would provide the resources through grants to accelerate those collaborations. And I'll give you a specific example. So a group of fellows came together, including a fellow from Chicago, in a previous life a hip-hop artist, but working to decrease the number of young African American men dying as a result of gun violence.
My name is Richard Wallace. I'm the founding executive director of Equity and Transformation, also known as EAT. We're an organization that was founded by and led by system-impacted and formerly incarcerated people.
He came to an event, met Māori, met Indigenous Australian, fascinated by the role that the reclamation of language and culture and heritage has in activism and in decreasing incarceration rates. He is now the recipient of a pretty significant grant where he takes young African American men back to West Africa, where their ancestors were first put onto ships, and it's called a Fellowship for Reclamation of Language, Land and Heritage. That will change lives.
I say that Equity and Transformation, we provide a space for communities to dream of new possibilities and do our best to provide them with the tools to create it.
Now that's modelled entirely on our experience, although contextualised.
What do they see when they look at Aotearoa in terms of transformation?
We take for granted the incredible work that many of our leaders have done over the last few decades, and beyond that. The way that we have navigated spaces, places, governments, when people told us that we couldn't do something, we did it. We mortgaged our homes and said, watch us. Whether that's kura kaupapa, kohanga reo, wharekura, wānanga. So what people see in Aotearoa is not only the fight and the kind of frontline activism that we should be incredibly proud of, but our capacity, our foresight, vision to find solutions.
Sometimes Māori found solutions in unconventional places. In 2013, Cuba was recognised by the United Nations for its achievement in eradicating illiteracy. In 2019, when Evie and Atlantic Fellows visited a literacy museum in Havana, she was reminded of the relationship between Cuba and Te Wānanga o Aotearoa.
They essentially turned around or transformed the literacy rates of Cubans to have one of the highest literacy rates in the world. We're listening to this professor from the University of Havana, and she starts talking about the relationship between Cuba and Fidel Castro and the literacy movement, the leaders of the literacy movement, and Te Wānanga o Aotearoa, holding up all of the Green Light program, which was the program that drew from the learnings of the literacy movement in Cuba and then was implemented in New Zealand.
It's amazing, eh, when you think about it?
Really cool. And all these fellows who are from the world kind of around the world going, what?
What? Coming up next, from Te Teko to Oxford to Havana to Te Awamutu.
Evie comes back to us, so she's coming back home, and she's got so many people that remember her in her leadership capacity, who are excited to work with her again.
Because people trust her because she follows through with what she believes in.
And our mum and dad, well, they were high achievers, and they expected us to do the best that we can, and especially in the Māori world. But I think for Evie, her greatest trait that she inherited from mum and dad was her humaria.
Their mother, Ka, who taught at Auckland Girls Grammar, Otu Muay Thai and Tauranga Girls Colleges, was a national president of the Māori Women's Welfare League. Dad, Mike, had a successful executive leadership career at the New Zealand Guardian Trust and the NZI Share Registry. He was also a lead claimant for Ngāti Hangarau. The couple enrolled their two sons at Hato Pētara and Evie at Hato Hōhepa.
He kōtiro humarie, number one. He kōtiro kaha ki te mahi. She had good work ethic, and she had great support, of course, from her whānau, particularly her mother.
Evie credits her former school principal for helping shape her students.
There's a strength that isn't brash, I think. Probably Maya is the best word to describe it, that girls have. And I think Miss Kingy instilled that in us, that we could have a go and do anything, but with grace.
Initially, she was keen on becoming a doctor.
Science was my thing, and then it all went sideways once I left school. Fell in love with the son of an activist and ended up doing things not the kind of traditional way in terms of where I am now.
The 21-year-old found herself teaching rangatahi at risk.
And I taught them retail and warehousing skills, how to count money, how to add, how to subtract. And it changed my life. And that's what sparked the love for teaching and the ability that, I guess, a teacher or a facilitator has to provide all of the conditions for success. And that was the beginning of it.
After 20 years of mahi in mainstream institutions, Evie was invited to work at Te Wānanga o Aotearoa.
Profoundly changed my life, professionally and personally. I have never laughed so much, been inspired so much, cried so much, nor sworn so much. But an extraordinary organisation that has achieved a quiet educational revolution that New Zealand should be proud of.
In another career move, Evie transferred to Te Wānanga o Awanuiarangi. Her role was to support the chief executive and his team with some serious organisational challenges. At the end of that process, she was appointed Deputy Chief Executive.
One of her phrases she always brought to our meetings was, management has to maintain a line of sight across every strata of the Wānanga's operation, in every program, every budget, every aspect of a particular program's operation. And if you are open and honest with our whānau, they're more likely to respond constructively than if it's seen as a witch hunt or something like that. It's also all about improving the governance, management, financial literacy of our staff and tauira across the strata.
Meanwhile, mainstream universities and institutions that have existed for years have been working on building diversity, equity and inclusion, DEI. They've developed programs to attract people from different backgrounds, cultures, genders and experiences into spaces traditionally populated by white, well-to-do males. But a worldwide counter-movement is putting all of that under threat.
My administration has taken action to abolish all discriminatory diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense, and these are policies that were absolute nonsense throughout the government and the private sector.
How does that impact on the sort of programs that you've been involved with and generally universities?
I think for DEI, particularly across the United States and in the UK, the kind of right-wing leadership that we're seeing actually has a positive impact because people become complacent in a state of calmness. And in a state of chaos and despair, our best leadership emerges. So my observation, particularly in the UK, is that it has emboldened the DEI agenda, diversity, equity and inclusion. The horse is bolted. We've achieved way too much. We just need to look at our young people, the hanas of this world, our daughters, to know that the future is bright.
The future is bright too for Te Wānanga o Aotearoa. Despite past controversies, the Wānanga now teaches out of 70 locations and caters to around 30,000 students. Around 40% are not Māori and many are adults returning back into education.
I think it's the environment and how we make people feel at ease, make them feel at home. Particularly second chance learners are not intimidated about how we teach, how we deliver. It's about Māori pedagogy and making sure people, first and foremost, are comfortable and then the study is something secondary.
And Te Whare Wānanga o Aotearoa has played a role as the conscience of Māori education, as have the other wānanga. reminding mainstream universities that mātauranga Māori is a science of its own.
Our students, our rangatahi, are in a very different world to what our model previously provided for. And so that's what we're looking to gain, is to retain everything that we are as a wānanga, as Te Wānanga Aotearoa, and move into the future.
As she steps into her new role, Evie credits her predecessors for providing a strong foundation. What are you taking from Oxford that will support you in your new role?
I think having the opportunity to go to Oxford gave me an appreciation of the things that we are good at. And for the wānanga, there are so many things that are special about that place, not least its legacy, its vision, whānau transformation through education, the way that the values are embedded in everything that happens, but most importantly, thinking about doing things differently.